All right, starting Good, Bad, or Bullshit, episode 144 in 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to Good, Bad, or Bullshit, the podcast that makes you happy. I'm Crofton Steers, the one that you came here to listen to, and with me, as always, are my two co-hosts, Mike Hodgins, the one that makes you angry. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Crofton. I am feeling angry after the way your intro started. So on track.
Right. And Bo Schwartz, the one whose voice makes you think he's saying intelligent things.
Hello, Crofton. Did you know that if you buy into REITs and maximize it with the short fund of the optimization of financial remuneration, you can actually profit without doing any work? And the listeners can too. It's a sweet little tip for everyone out there. Get in on it before everyone gets in on it, and then it's not a secret anymore, and no one gains.
Bo, you missed your
insider information right there for you, straight from the Trump man himself. I'm his personal friend. I like Trump. I really like Trump. Trump likes me. We like each other, but just as
it's
pals.
true that Trump does love the poorly educated.
Said
it himself.
You do.
Go fuck yourself.
You may have missed your opportunity as a timeshare salesman or perhaps a pyramid scheme orchestrator, Bo.
Or you could have got in with Trump's mortgage company that started in like 2007. I love when that's pointed out as one of his failed businesses, and they show him being like, "It's a great time to be in the mortgage business." It's like right before the whole thing tanked. I'm like, oh,
he's such a shill,
America
man.
Working again.
Say what you will about him, because I only ever hear about failures and how he's stupid, but he's a real hard-working shill. Whenever I see him there on the TV, he's always wanting me to think things and to buy things and looking real charming, like. And
who are you looking at?
I think he has a charisma that people buy into. Even like that's the joke. It's that his hair is so nasty. He's an orange person. He says dumb shit, but he's got swagger. You don't have swagger. Crofton doesn't have swagger.
I have swagger.
I don't have swagger like that. So that guy's got mad swagger.
You're mistaking swagger with like arrogance, and
arrogance is part of swagger. You got
for you. And in any case,
you gotta admit though, Trump's got to be doing something right when we spend the second podcast in a row doing preamble about an American politician.
It's true.
I have a completely unrelated thing to mention.
Do it.
You guys are gonna think this is stupid for sure, but I'll mention it anyways. The other day, I had like what I consider to be a stupid epiphany, whereas when I thought of this idea, I was like, oh, I've never thought of this before, and it felt meaningful to me, but yet it was also really stupid. So it occurred to me, and you guys are probably just going to roll your eyes, as will our listeners, that the alphabet is in arbitrary order, and that had just never occurred to me. I guess with my kid, I'd be like A, B, C. I'm like, wait a minute, it doesn't matter what order those letters go in. It's not like numbers where you have increasing values or amounts. The alphabet, it could be any order.
Look, let me. I need to respond to this. First of all, that is not a stupid epiphany. I think that's your cynic side. Even saying your own thoughts are stupid. You're like, I'm having a thought. It's great. Why am I having this thought? It's stupid. It's fucking awful. But actually,
it seems obvious.
It seems obvious, which is I think more
it's
what you're
stupid.
No, wait.
Sure.
Because I never considered it either, and I'm glad you said it because you're right. Who is the person who said that they had to be in the order they're in? There is no numerical value associated with any. It's a letter. It's completely number neutral, order neutral.
Yeah, and yet we use it as if the order is important. Like if you get to sometimes it'll be like 1A, 1B, and they'll use that as if it's not in any kind of ascending order.
See, I can hear Bo typing now, and the reason that he's typing is because it would probably be super easy to find this on the internet and why the order is as it is in 2 seconds.
I'll make a new show called Ask Google Questions.
And I will say to defend Mike's stupid epiphany is that often we end up using, especially expressions, you'll use throughout your life, and you'll never really think about where did that expression come from? Why do I say it this way? I've been saying it my whole life, but it probably stems from something. Somebody came up with it. It's related to something, and something that you might not even know. So the alphabet is one of those.
I know we frown upon live research, but I have a quotable here for you from the OxfordDictionaries.com, the place where you go to get the word stuff. It's a quotable. I pulled it right out. So blah, blah, blah comes from this civilization, that comes from this civilization. The Greeks had an alphabet, blah, blah, blah. You know, language evolves over time.
Yeah.
But the final sentence is, in other words, we do it like this because we've always done it like this. But why we did it in the first place, no one knows.
Yeah. And I guess...
Well, that was not helpful.
Well, no, actually, I think that's correct. I mean, obviously we do it because it's convention. You know, and that's the way we're taught it. But again, when I thought, I'm like, it's totally arbitrary. And I was like, oh, I never thought of this before. And yet it's so obvious. And anyways, yeah, it's kind of stupid, but
sure. I really appreciated that you had that thought and that you shared it.
And Crofton,
the look on Crofton's face right now is like, it's so dumb.
All right. Well, that wasn't really...
Crofton, you might be a little bit of a cynic yourself. You shouldn't give Mike so much of a hard time.
To be fair, I'm actually really sick, and so my energy level for tomfoolery is at a low point.
Well, then we should get right to a topic.
Well, I guess that's probably...
All right, Mike, give her a crank there, buddy.
Bo says that to Michael.
C-D-E-F-G
Sometimes related to the random topic.
H-I-J-K-L-M-N-O-P.
Other times related
U-R-S-T-U-V-W-X-Y and Z. All right, Mike, what's our topic today, sir?
Today is the martial arts.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
Way back when we did mixed martial arts, which I guess is like...
Yeah, but that's like a really specific kind of like, entertainment sport. This is just like
Kung Fu.
Or karate.
Or jiu-jitsu.
It's funny because it just seems like the same shit to me. It's just one's popular on TV and the other's not.
Well, no, because the reason it's called mixed martial arts is because it was something that it's like an amalgam of effective portions of any and all martial arts for the purposes of beating someone up in the most effective way possible, which is why they all do it the same way now, I guess. Whereas if you like a practitioner of, say, Taekwondo or Kung Fu or karate, I feel like you have to say it like that. It's a specific type of fighting, right? Or judo.
Capoeira.
Yeah. All of them, but they have a specific way of doing something, and it's not like
Jewish jitsu.
What?
No, there's no. It's jiu-jitsu. Okay. And the one Bruce Lee came up with was Jeet Kune Do.
I think you're thinking Krav Maga is actually the
Israeli
martial art.
Well, here's a question I never had before your explanation of the difference between the two. So you say, like, if there is a martial art which is mixed martial art that is just consolidating all the best aspects of martial arts or most effective ones into one martial art, then what are the other ones good for?
Because I think on that topic we were specifically focused on like UFC, the octagon style, that culture, that mixed MMA, that
people wearing
sport.
tap-out shirts and drinking protein
we
drinks
didn't go, we weren't discussing like the lifelong training of Shaolin monks. If that's
sounds
even
like
a real
you guys
thing,
are just trying to have your cake and eat it too with how we perceive this topic,
dude,
as opposed to how we
that's
perceive
sick
that
Crofton
other
talking
topic.
because this is basically fighting. Crofton likes fighting, I think.
Yeah.
You like wrestling, you like MMA, you like the fighting stuff. This is a good topic, right?
We've not done this before on the show, but I'm happy to just spin the machine again if you think it's too similar.
Oh, we've never done this. Oh, is today the day?
You think it's for
veto from Crofton?
What? Why are you both talking at the same time? I'm sick. I can't decipher all these words.
You can just get the machine going again and get a new random topic.
Veto. I'll support your veto.
I'm not necessarily vetoing because as long as I understand that there's a difference. You guys essentially were reviewing mixed martial arts less as martial arts and more as UFC pay-per-views and TVs, and now you want to talk about martial arts as martial
Well,
arts.
Well,
we don't. The random topic generator wants to talk about it.
Separate. I'm just saying, like, these are, you know, I understand why you would want to differentiate the two. It makes it much easier to give one a bad one and one a good one.
Okay, let's start the machine again.
All right,
it's a precedent. Let's do it.
Give it. We got it. We got
All right,
veto
fine,
initiated.
whatever.
This is
I
a
asked
historic day.
questions and no.
Historic day. Here we go.
Wow, first time seeing machines. This will be the answer to a trivia question one day.
Okay, well, this is sort of different.
Wait, let me guess. Karate.
No, we should do karate.
Karate.
No, it is Lord of the Rings.
Nice. That's man. That veto was worth.
Well, so we've done a series of these. We've done Star Trek. We've done Star Wars. I guess we had to throw into the hopper if the fantasy large franchise there.
I would like to point out how when we post the episode, it is going to be called Lord of the Rings, and it's going to go up, and whoever is into Lord of the Rings is going to go on an emotional journey to reach the point where we do talk about Lord of the Rings. So that person is going to go through Donald Trump, going to go through Mike's epiphany on the alphabet, going to go through the random topic generator pulling out martial arts, then us re-examining that topic, and then finally us running it again and talking about Lord of the Rings. So if you made it this far,
recapping what happened so far.
If you made it this far, Lord of the Rings fans, kudos, because now we will talk about Lord of the Rings.
It's
like 11 minutes you won't get back, friends.
Well, it's sort of like the whole middle book.
Middle book slam.
Two Tower slam.
Okay, so there's two ways of sort of discussing the Lord of the Rings. One is as a work in and of itself, and two is with regards to its overall impact and what it is essentially influenced since release. Two things which I think are both notable. I really enjoyed Lord of the Rings, especially as a teenager, and The Hobbit as well, which is the essentially prequel book. And now it's funny because like we go to the movies and all the movies are tied in, like they're all part of cinematic universes, and everything is like sort of nothing is a one shot anymore. Everything is interconnected. But when the Lord of the Rings came out, that was new. There was very few things. There was C.S. Lewis and the Narnia stuff, and there was J.R.R. Tolkien and the Middle Earth stuff, and these were like the idea of breaking a book into multiple parts and creating a fictional world, stuff that we find all over our bookstores or whatever nowadays, movie theaters, whatever. That was really innovative, and so part of it is a little dated in that regard because it was the first or one of the first of one of these things. But I think the story like is a good story, and the world is still an interesting world. I think it holds up fairly well.
I mean, clearly, yeah, it's rich. There's a lot there, and I mean the 2 points to which you speak, its impact, I think can't kind of be understated, and then but the other side of it, the work itself, and it was you that pointed out to me, you were into this Wheel of Time thing. I think it was that one where you were like, the guy who wrote that was like, I can write better fantasy than at least I don't know if it was Lord of the Rings or whatever, and then you told me some story about how like that guy just sort of said like, I can write better fantasy, and then wrote stuff, and then you were like, and it is better. And having recently I've been reading the Game of Thrones sort of Song of Ice and Fire, and it's more intriguing in a lot of ways because it's more like it has the same richness. So in that someone has spent years of their life creating a world in which you can immerse yourself with the details filled in or at least existing. And then, the story itself is sort of like the Lord of the Rings, but it's kind of like juvenile. Is that the right word? Like it's very no one dies
Well,
really.
it's like in Lord of
Boromir.
Yeah,
Spoilers.
because he was bad. Remember, he was bad, and then
Spoilers.
I mean, doesn't
every
Smaug die
time-
as well? Well, that's the Hobbit, but
I
anyways.
just point out the two that we talked about, Wheel of Time and Song of Ice and Fire. Neither of those knew how to end. So there's something to be said about something that, it had a solid beginning, middle, and end. And it's funny because you can't get away from these Peter Jackson movies as well, which were pretty notable movies. If you look at the top grossing fantasy films of all time, they're all there. If you look at the top grossing films of all time, they're often there. But often that second movie, The Two Towers, is considered by many people the best of the three. And it's funny because I agree with Mike. When I'm reading the books, when they're slogging through the swamps of Mordor, I was just like, oh God, just make it
There's
end.
some lulls in that middle.
Yeah, I know. And Gollum is following them.
I think the difference, though, I mean, apart from the obvious climate of the times, or it's just that I think Lord of the Rings is more heavily. I don't want to say influenced because I don't really know, but it just feels more like a fable. It has elements of that sort of magic realism in it. It has elements of, this symbolism to things, even though, this was the first to do this world building thing, which, don't want to understate its influence. It's like we wouldn't have Dungeons and Dragons and role playing games, and you wouldn't be going to Renaissance fair or doing LARPing, I guess is more accurate. Like you wouldn't have the Warcraft movie coming out, that wouldn't be there. These video games and like all this culture, sort of based on this notion that they built the world. But I think the world he built wasn't like it was more symbolic and more broad and more magical. Even like the little things are magical. Whereas like if you take Game of Thrones, it's world building. Like I don't want to say it's different, but it doesn't feel like a fable. And I haven't read Wheel of Time, so I can't comment, but you can. But Lord of the Rings definitely feels like reading like Hansel and Gretel or something like that, but on a large scale with a lot of detail and world building, but still very symbolic, if that makes sense.
Everything is tweaked that's followed from the Lord of the Rings. Like dragons are this concept that we just like, they existed prior to the Lord of the Rings, but that sort of iconic vision of a dragon that permeates, like, say, the Dragonlance and the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, all that sort of stuff, that comes from Lord of the Rings. Dwarves, elves, stuff that are like a dime a dozen and everything else that we just take for granted, comes from Lord of the Rings. The Wheel of Time, I always felt like the world was extremely well developed in terms of all the like details, almost too well developed. But like the Shadow Riders and that, like, that are essentially the Riders of the Ring, like they're completely cribbed from Lord of the Rings. There's tons of that stuff going on. So yeah, the influence, the impact of Lord of the Rings is huge. But I think I would argue that, like, unlike other, like Star Wars, we talked about on the show, Star Wars was a cinematic entity first, as Mike always points out. Like, it wasn't an adaptation of something else. What it was, though, was a hodgepodge of many different things, like Westerns, B movies, serials, Flash Gordon, all this sort of stuff brought into kind of one vision. The Lord of the Rings was J.R.R. Tolkien's attempt at writing a mythic history for Great Britain. One that he felt like he felt that they lacked a history, like Bo's talking about fables and creatures that he saw in other lands. He felt Britain didn't have this history, so he essentially crafted one. And to that effect, he did a remarkable job. And one of the things that has not really been stolen, I guess you could argue halflings are hobbits as well, like in Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. But hobbits are one of those creatures that you see in nothing else. Like the idea of these like quintessential British, tea and biscuits in the Shire, let's smoke some pipe weed on a barrel. Like, I mean, that is, to me, quintessential Lord of the Rings, and I haven't seen that really taken anywhere else.
No, it's true. It has like people cribbing. Like I remember I was a big Dragonlance reader back in the day. a Dungeons and Dragons universe set in the world of Kryn, and it had its own little thing. There was a character called Tasselhoff, and it's funny because they had their version of companions too, with like elves, and he was a Kender, which is just like a short, thievy guy with quick reflexes and can be really quiet. I'm like, it's basically a hobbit, but it's called a Kinder or Kender or something. Like I think it's been cribbed, but you're right. I can't think of any instances of hobbitses in any other sort of works of fiction where it's clearly a hobbit culture. They're called hobbits, and they, it's very unique to the Lord of the Rings thing.
Yeah,
it's weird how that works.
It is, I mean, I'd be curious where his inspiration for hobbits came from, but clearly all other things like Croft was saying, like, dragons existed in stories, or as did elves, dwarves, or any number of things. It's like, because wasn't he's a linguist, right? And I think that was his profession. Is that a profession?
I believe.
Or was he an academic? Something to do with linguistics. So in creating the Elvish language, and that was a huge part of the intrigue for him, I think. But a lot of it is drawn from existing sort of like myths and fables that did exist, but not in the kind of form. It's like the form that the long form kind of multiple novels was like, I guess, unique as well, in that, like, you might have stories with elves or like people like Rumpelstiltskin and these like fairy tales and things which had a lot of these creatures and things in it, but they existed in little, like, it's like little fables that told some small truth or something. Yeah. And he put it together in this epic. It's like epic storytelling. Though I guess that would have existed too, because isn't that what Beowulf is? Croft.
Yeah, well, Beowulf is sort of an epic poem. And
poem, I mean, like
and it's been through multiple translations and this sort of thing, and it's something that's not like there's Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. There's all these sort of poems and short stories, but nothing like epic and uniform and brought together in the way that the Lord of the Rings are.
What about like the King Arthur stuff? Any of that's
that's often tied in with Christianity and religion, and I think Lord of the Rings was a big step away from that, which I think still at the time of its publication would have been, about Narnia and the C.S. Lewis stuff.
Yeah, it's
allegory. Whereas they really stepped away, whereas the Knights of the Round Table and the Holy Grail and all that sort of stuff, much more tied in with sort of religious tropes. I do think, Mike, when you're talking about him being a linguist, and it is interesting how he wrote all the Elvish and stuff, he was a cunning linguist, that's for sure. But these poems and the songs in the books are really interesting, because that's not something that you see nowadays anymore. Like when you read a fantasy book, there's not 2 pages of Tom Bombadil singing some sort of dopey song to people. Like that's really and maybe that ties into what you were saying about it being childish. I guess what I'm having a hard time with is whenever we do this show and we pick a topic, I like to try and think about how you would label it, the different labels, good, bad, or bullshit. Normally, I'll have an issue where we'll pull something that's clearly negative, and I just don't see how you can call it anything other than a negative thing and not call it good. In this case, I just don't know how you wouldn't call, like, what is bad about the Lord of the Rings? What is something that would lead you to give it a bad verdict?
Well, it's a fantasy novel. It's a time-wasting piece of crap that people shouldn't read because it's got nothing in reality.
Spawned the tens of millions of words of trash fantasy that litters the bookshelves of used bookstores.
Yeah, and that it's like rather than watch new things, we like this old thing or something. I don't know.
Those are interesting points. Like in the there's always going to be trash something, right? Like it's going to be trash fantasy, it's going to be trash something else. There'll always be trash books. Derivative things or whatever. For every great idea, stuff is going to be derivative. And Bo, like what you said, I could see a certain subset of the population being like, oh yeah, why waste your time with fake stuff? I know my mom, and I've mentioned this before, she just science fiction and fantasy, she just does not get. And she comes from that time period of like, that's for children, that's in comic books and all that sort of stuff. I find we're kind of, that's becoming less. People of our generation, even the generation immediately prior, have grown up with like the Lord of the Rings and this sort of thing. So I think that it's had a positive effect on how people are more accepting of imaginative ideas across all mediums.
It's funny. My brother's the other way. He can't fathom any fantasy. He's like, he was looking for TV shows to watch. I'm like, hey, you should watch a Game of Thrones like
All right.
TV show adaptation. You'll like it. And he's like, no, I can't do that fantasy crap. And I'm like, nah, it's like it's good. I'm like, if you like,
it's practically alternate history, a lot of it,
yeah, exactly. I mean, like, I was like, you'd find it entertaining, but it puts him off, and a lot of people are put off by fantasy as well. I guess my question is like, do we overstate the importance of, say, this particular work? Like, is it if J.R. Tolkien hadn't written this book, would there be no fantasy as we know it? Like, is that true?
I think it would be different.
Yeah.
I think there would be. I think there would be some like ideas eventually rise to the top, and I think you see stuff like everything from like John Carter from Mars and Edward Burroughs' stories. Like there's all sorts of imaginative stories that were out there, but nothing that really sunk into the public consciousness like this does. And you see how that, like, even in my generation, I've seen these works that have tapped into people's collective imagination. Everybody like either complains or is enjoying the fact that there is a bazillion superhero movies right now. When I was a kid, I was really into superhero stuff, but it was not like, it had not tapped into the collective consciousness at such a broad degree as when like the first Spider-Man movies came out in this. Like then there's real like desire for people to see this on the big screen that continues to this day. I think that the Lord of the Rings is one of those important books, and had it not existed, I don't know if things would be the same level of popularity. The tropes, the things that we talk about as tweaks that are derivative, whatever, the Dungeons and Dragons, the whatever, like, would they look the same? Would they exist? And if they do exist, how would they look?
I mean, it's possible to think that, like, okay, that that specific work really did inform what came after it, because everyone borrows from everything else. Like, there is no creative work which stands alone. It's just that's just the truth about creative endeavors. So the fact that J.R. Tolkien, and a lot of the this happens with a lot of ideas where you say, like, he was in this place at a certain time, he had a certain the skill set he had, and what he was inspired by or drawn from was things that existed already. All these concepts of elves and kings and medieval fantasy, like the ideas of that, they already existed in other forms, right?
Sure.
And and it's so, but like the form, like, when did he write these? Was it like late 1800s?
I thought they were. What? No, I thought they were published like in the 60s, weren't they?
No, I
I thought
think
it was like 19. I thought he wrote them in like early 1900s.
yeah, I think that's
not
early yeah, it might be early 1900s. That might be worth looking at.
No,
Okay, look it up.
him and C.S. Lewis would eat together and stuff. Oh no. It's so Story began as a sequel to Tolkien's 1937 fantasy novel The Hobbit. So it was 37. So written in stages between 37 and 49. So it was, when was it first published though?
Yeah, okay, so
Published in for economic reasons, The Lord of the Rings was published in 3 volumes over the course of a year, from the 29th of July 1954 to the 20th of October 55. So I was close with the 60s.
Yeah, and for publishing, but I'm just trying to think, like, okay, what was the context in which he was working? So he wrote them in the 30s, or late, going forward from there. But like, when did the idea of long novels even come about? And I think a lot of, you think of like Dickens, and it's sort of like the rise of print. So, which was only maybe a matter of 100 years prior. So like, so you have a different form. These other ideas were still around. I guess what I'm just trying to say is like, would someone else just not have done something similar if it wasn't him? And
I don't think so.
well, and this is used for a lot of people say this for things like the theory of evolution. Is Darwin some genius? And other people saying like, nah, it was in the air. There was other people that had similar ideas at the time. You said C.S. Lewis. You could argue, okay, it's got this Christian element, but like it's.
But C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, like they went to coffee together. They had a club together. Like they.
Well, there you go. But so the point is it's like there was something brewing there, and it's like, and again like this something like Star Wars, which hadn't been seen before, whatever. But like if that hadn't been done, would there never have been a movie like that?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, I'm just not sure. Like, I mean, maybe it would have taken a longer time.
Well, there were space movies before Star Wars, and there were
space movies before Star Wars. They were different, and they were way pulpier. And
but
there was also space fiction.
They didn't capture something. Like, there's this sort of magical alchemy to certain things that strikes with people.
I agree, but I think what both of these things do, and what I think Lord of the Rings did do, again, was draw from stuff which existed, kind of mash it into something new. And I think that that's done a lot with a lot of different things. I guess I'm trying to play devil's advocate here.
I understand. I understand what you're doing.
But and again, to be like, so this actual work is kind of like, you read it sort of like, it's sort of predictable and formulaic. All the characters you like don't really die except the one you can kind of tell is going to go wrong, Boromir.
I think it is. I think you have to question the age in which you're reading it, where you're already bombarded from an early age with this kind of dramatic structure. So, like, being clever at figuring out what happens in plots is not like you don't deserve a medal for it when you've been watching stories, since the age of 2 or whatever, whenever they sat you in front of a TV or gave you a book to read. I think the readership was a lot different back then,
what
experience
I'm saying,
of it. And I have something to add to that, because I think the thing that you're missing here, and I haven't read all fantasy books, so I don't have a base of knowledge, is that this is a book, while it has a large cast of characters and some of them really cool, the main through line for this is the journey of Frodo, who is not an awesome stalwart knight or some Mr. Cool dude and some, with the damsel in distress or whatever. It's like a child. He is like a child coming into the world, and everything is hard for this person. You talk about the slog in the middle of the book. Well, there's something kind of to the fact that you feel like it's a slog, because it most certainly was a slog for the characters. And I think there's something about the journey, this fable-like, or I don't know, this journey, like Odysseus-like journey from like Greek texts, that is really fundamental to this. That it wasn't like I'm just trying to do world building and make this fantasy world for generations of people who love this stuff, but there's something that you connect with very deeply with a protagonist's hero journey, and this one is very much about Frodo's hero journey, just very well developed.
So that's an interesting point. Like, again, it's like a hero's quest kind of thing, which existed, and you referred to like Greek texts. So this type of like epic sort of story thing did exist before in different forms, and I would say that the long form novel was fairly recent with people like Dickens. If you've ever read any Dickens, it's long, a lot happens.
Often published in the newspaper over multi-stages, right?
And you might argue that that's where the large novel came from. The fact that people wanted to publish weekly in papers, so they became super long and they're paid by the word. So that maybe delivered the novel.
So someday this podcast will be published in like on a super CD in the future. The entire series is one shot, one.
No, in the
CD?
future, people will not have patience.
They'll just download it straight to their brain and they'll have watched it all in 2 seconds.
Again, all I'm saying, so all these it's like all these pieces were floating around, and he just took like it's a long form fiction which already existed, and kind of like this sort of particular type of European mythology. And like fable like mythology, and just put them together. And I'm not trying. Again, I'm trying to pay.
No, I get. I think it's clear that you're making a point. So it's not a bad point. I just to move on just slightly from it, because Bo was raising a point that I thought was interesting about Frodo's hero journey, and something that I found different, and not necessarily something that I enjoyed, especially as a kid, is you are presented with this character, especially coming off the Hobbit, which you're clearly, it is Bilbo's hero journey. Like Bilbo goes on a grand adventure and it's whimsical and all this. Frodo's adventure, like, honestly, kind of sucks, and it's more about Sam's hero journey than it is anybody's. And what does Frodo really do? And this kind of bothered me a bit as a kid, because you don't essentially he takes on this responsibility as the ring bearer, and that in the ring turns him, becomes heavier and turns him evil. In the very first leg of the story, he gets stabbed by one of these poisonous swords that essentially screws him for the part of the remaining trip. He's a burden and carried many times by other people. Yes, he makes some selfless choices, but the reality is, like, he starts even turning evil at the end, pushes Sam away and all that, and it's really, Sam's steadfast friendship comes back, and you're, as especially a young reader, you're sold on Sam as being kind of like the assistant, the associate, the buddy, but not the main guy. The main guy was supposed to be Frodo. He's, descendant from Bilbo. Bilbo was the main guy last time, but really, Frodo doesn't do a tremendous amount of things, and it was really actually only seeing it in the films afterwards, and I was like, man, Frodo is really, like, he really doesn't do too much. He's important, but in terms of how books are generally structured and hero journeys generally are, can you imagine, like, if Luke Skywalker, the whole movies were like, of Star Wars movies, in the first one he gets, like, maybe his hand cut off, and then he gets an infection, and then Han Solo has to drag him around the whole time, and then at the very end of the movie he's able to push Darth Vader over with his last breath or something. I mean, it is kind of interesting, the creative direction that Tolkien took with this. I think that's an unusual direction to take with a character.
It would be like at the end of Star Wars when the Emperor would be like, join us, and then Luke Skywalker would be like, yeah, okay, and then R2-D2 comes out and throws him into the pit, because that's kind of how isn't that kind of how it ends, where it's like Samwise is like kind of like, when he puts the ring on. Anyways,
and also Gollum is there as this sort of, like, character that is perhaps, seeking some form of redemption, right? Like, he's obsessed with the ring. He's obsessed with the ring, but one of the big things that Frodo does is shows forgiveness towards Gollum, where Sam is like, we gotta stab this motherfucker. Frodo is like, Sam, now we have to trust in the Gollum and blah blah blah. He will lead us the way and all this sort of thing. And at the end, like, when and this is obviously the magic and the hold of the ring, and I get it, but like, in terms of stereotypical plot beats, you would expect that Gollum would turn, or would turn good, would redeem himself. In the end, he does lead to the ring being destroyed, but it's almost more of a series of farcical coincidences than it is a concrete determination by his.
Yeah, I mean, but he's almost used as like a proof that the ring will corrupt anyone, because he's this creature that's like a hobbit, and they have these glimpses to his youth, and he was corrupted by the ring and was consumed by it, and I think it was become pretty clear that, like, the same fate would have befallen Frodo if he hadn't had help from friends and allies or whatever. But again, this comes back to, again, maybe one of my other main criticisms, and I'm trying to be the which is
how to do it
as a counter to something like a more modern fantasy novel, in that it deals with extremely simplistic concepts, like there is evil and then there is good, and good must be evil, and that's and to some extent we did a whole podcast on good and evil, which I think we largely agreed that that whole concept is a bunch of bullshit and potentially even a bad thing. So, and these stories operate under that very, like, you have Mordor and whatever I can't remember, Sauron, and he's like pure evil and made this ring is evil. Like, that's it, right? It's like, what motivates him? Like, he's evil. I don't know. And then you have good characters like Gandalf, who are just like, and other elves who are just good. And it's like, good must fight evil. And you're like, what is this? This is nothing. And then you read something like George R.R. Martin, these guys in the RRs, which is this whole layers of human motivation and shades of gray.
That's
and you're
just
like,
hipster fantasy, dude.
no, it's not. No, it's just that what it does, I think it's a more complex and more realistic telling of any kind of story. And again, I think this is because Tolkien drew from like fables, which are simplistic children's sort of narratives, which are just like there's bad things and they're evil is bad and be good.
Sure.
But that the reality is all kinds of people do things for all kinds of different motivations, which are not necessarily good nor bad, though they may affect people in ways that are perceived as good or bad or evil, though from that person's point of view. So when you read something that is really layered with character motivations, you realize that, and that the world is complex, and it's not just like, oh, it's evil, period. And that there's good, period, in the same way that a lot of superhero stuff is very simplistic that way. The more rich stories look at the complexities of motivation and how we perceive things that are good or bad, or why you root for some people. So, to some degree, like, it's a really simplistic, like, themes.
But
And you can't also wash that under the rug by saying it's of the time, because books like, The Great Gatsby and stuff like that had characters going through, multi-layered emotional journeys without everything being simplified to this character's good or this character's evil. Like, it was happening in other fiction. It's just that fantasy and sci-fi have always been slower to adapt to those sort of tropes. They have played to a younger age group.
I think that there's more moral ambiguity than you guys are giving credit for. Now, I'm basing this mostly on the book as opposed to the film, which is very much Hollywoodized in some respects. Because in the larger scale, Sauron's going to blink out the world. That's his purpose. And everyone has a stake in that not happening.
Why is that his purpose? I don't understand.
Exactly. That's
wait, but it doesn't matter, because when you take a fantasy book, especially one based on fables, and try to rationalize and explain everything as people who love a thing or want to do, you miss the point. Because the point is the journey, not the logical sum of the balance and parts of a thing. And because, like, Gandalf is not good. Gandalf is a force for the positive, what's good to the stakeholders, or the people who live in the world, but the elves are dispassionate. They're sometimes good, they're sometimes dicks, they're real dicks sometimes, especially those wood elves, I think. And
never trust a wood elf.
Dwarves are very selfish, the humans are small-minded, the hobbits are kind of self-involved. Like, there's a lot of shades of gray for a book that, yes, there's a good versus evil, but all through the journey there's an exploration of themes that are not necessarily it's the good guys versus the bad guys. And I think that's depicted in the film a little too bluntly, but I think it's not as prevalent when you're reading the book.
Well, and it's like, but just things like orcs. You have all these creatures who are there to be slaughtered, and they're like these evil creatures. Like, well, what are they?
Well, they're GMOs, dude. Like, they're GMO. Like, Saruman, the White, like, formerly the White, I think, he makes them, right? Like, they're just GMOs. There are also
things like goblins that weren't made. There's like there's creatures that are evil,
but they're not evil. They're just dicks.
Like the Balrog is this evil. Like, I guess and your point's well taken in the sense that, like, what this is I think it's a simplistic adventure. And The Hobbit in particular, is aimed somewhat at children. And I read it, I think, when I was 12 or 13, and it's a wonderful book to read at that age, The Hobbit particularly. And I think because it's kind of aimed at younger audiences, I think, to some extent. And
I think The Hobbit is much more so than The Lord of the Rings.
Much more so, but the other ones just think it's still probably like younger-ish readers, which is why, like, some of these things are, as much as you're like, yeah, it's this adventure, and yeah, they go on this journey, but and I've read the books multiple times. I obviously love them to some extent. But just when I think deeply about them, I'm like, you should, read something like A Song of Ice and Fire and see things where you're like, it seems like there's all these evil characters, but there's not.
Song of Ice and Fire is a fantasy book, like, in the modern sense that we understand it. This is a fable. This is not meant. It's meant to be reference for children. And I think somewhere I read that Tolkien was sort of thinking about storytelling to his children or a niece or something. Like, it was written with that in mind, but it's not intended only to be read by children. They're not children's books. They're meant to be read by everyone, but they are meant to act. A child's mind and imagination is more likely to be activated by these things than an adult who's clouded with cynicism and rationality.
That was my whole point. Is that it's again, I'm trying to find things to poke at it. And
I know.
Like, yeah, it's kind of simple. That's not necessarily bad either.
But I don't think. Sorry, Crofton, just to interrupt. I just don't think it's. The movies do a good job or a bad job of making it kind of good versus evil in that Hollywood style, even though they're pretty well done. But the book is very involved and goes down these side passages that are just these magical little journeys of literature, really, like the whole Tom Bombadil thing, and the experience with no, I'm forgetting now. But anyways, like the Riders of Rohan, that's a great part of the book and all that kind of, like and when they get lost, not in the what's the marshes, the dead marshes, but when they finally get into Mordor, there's a lot that happens in there, like Mount Doom and all that, and it's real good. So I read it in my late 20s, I think. So there's a different perspective you have. You might want to give it a flip.
I've read it like
I think oh, you're not giving Mike enough credit here. He's probably read it more than both of us put together, and he's playing devil's advocate because somebody needs to do it here.
I'm picking on Mike.
And I will say that it's that he does raise some interesting points, but it does make me, when I hear him especially repeatedly bring up George R. R. Martin, who I lose more and more respect for pretty much as that series goes on, and just
off the rails a bit.
Yeah, it's off the rails, and I think that there's something to be said about knowing how to finish a story, and I'm starting to appreciate that more and more. And so the Lord of the Rings is in many ways like sort of a fable type structure, has a beginning, has a middle, has an end, has a sizable amount of characters, sizable amount of subplots. A lot of people go on different journeys. Bo is right on one side of the equation, not the evil side. The good side, there's different characters with different motivations. On the evil side, everyone's just evil. And if anything, it is one of the first pieces of fiction that I can remember that introduces this concept of like falling to the evil side, which was, borrowed heavily by Star Wars with the falling to the dark side.
Well, the whole Bible.
What is
there's clearly a narrative of bad stuff and good stuff that is,
It's true, right? And then it was because there's people that would just like fall to the temptation of the devil, right? In the Bible, that would be it.
Like Eve, she's like, "Hey, look at this apple. The snake said it was good. Guess I'll eat it."
Yeah, the difference between that though is that's somebody talking you into something, whereas I'm talking more like about, and I know there are some Bible stories that might be better served as examples, but the idea of like some sort of magical force, the dark side, or like whatever's in the Ring of Power, the evil influence that affects what's his name, the guy that talks to the king, something tongue, Wormtongue,
I think.
Yeah, and like all that sort of stuff. The idea is that when Saruman falls to the evil side, instead of just being like, I turned heel and I'm gonna join Sauron, he's saying like he's essentially being affected by evil magics of the mind as well. Like, so he's not in his right, he's not in his right mind. It's sort of a cop. I understand what Mike's saying, because when you get into these situations, it's sort of a cop out. Like Boromir on his deathbed is like, oh, I was, it was the ring. It made me evil, and now I'm dying, so I'm not evil anymore. And they're like, oh, Boromir,
let's all feel sad.
We forgive you, So having these external forces that drive people to evil, is like, you can look at it as a narrative cop out. If anything, it makes it really easy. It's why we enjoy people enjoy fiction about the Nazis. Nazis, even though it's a complex socio-political phenomenon, people can easily look at Nazis and be like, oh, they're evil. Let's just kill them, or whatever.
Easy to hate Nazis.
It's the same with zombies or the same with whatever. So the Lord of the Rings managed to fabricate a sort of uniform enemy empire which is now common, a dime a dozen in a lot of fiction. So it's just like I think like there's so many things that it pioneered, and so much effect. And yeah, some of the effects are negative, but like anyway, I don't know if you guys are ready to roll up into verdicts.
Considering that English literature academics have probably filled endless volumes, the Lord of the Rings trilogy 1,000 times over, I don't think we can cover the entire gamut of a conversation on Lord of the Rings alone in one hour podcast. Certainly we can't have time to cover the expanded universe, because there are a lot of Middle Earth books written by Tolkien, like I think the Silmarillion.
Yeah, but that's like,
but they're considered Middle Earth. They're in the canon of Middle Earth. And I know when I was a younger person, I believe it was his son was writing books set in the the world of the middle. Like, they're continuing to be made. I presume. I don't know if they still are,
like
but
cop out. Like, I give him.
It's not a cop out. That's
credit,
all fantasy. Like all fantasy settings. Like Dragonlance, they're still hiring writers to pump out books set in the world of Dragonlance. And the one thing I like about Lord of the Rings, and you add the Hobbit into it, is that it can be this closed space, even though it's really long. But you give George R.R. Martin crap, but I'm like, pretty much all fantasy authors, including the man himself, J.R.R. Tolkien, has a world that never ends. It never runs out of stories.
And I'm like, yeah, I disagree with that. I'm like, I think it is closed. Like, I think it's sacrilege. To me, it seems sacrilege for people to be like, oh, I'll write some stories set in, like, it's pretty much just like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, that's it. Like, there's pretty much, if you're looking for more details, you got to read his giant appendix. Like, that's, it's not like there's other stories. And the Silmarillion is like this poem. It's difficult to read and not very
But like, as long as it's set in the world, it's got the brand. Like, it's
yeah, but
there's a set of shared assumptions in that world that you bring to a story that you see as in that world, right?
It's different than like Dungeons. Anyways, yeah, okay, we should probably get the verdict here.
All right, well, let's bring in our fantasy sheep. Where are they?
Yeah, they should be like orcs and trolls.
I wish if I would have known we were doing it, I would have brought in orcs and trolls and hints.
Order, I said. Order in the court.
Also worth noting that I really like the Ents. Are they Entwerps or just Ents? But
yeah, the Ents are awesome.
Yeah, and the journeys of Peregrine took, and the other guy,
Mary.
Mary. What's his other? He has another name though. Mary. One's a full of a took, and the other one is a whatever. Why don't you help me instead of moving me along? Right,
I don't know. He's called Mary. I don't know.
All right. Who wants to go first?
Brandybuck?
You might be Yes, Meriadoc, Brandybuck, and Peregrine Took.
That's good.
Two of the best names in the fantasy.
I think I'm gonna change my verdict now that we know that.
All right, go.
Me? Okay, I will go first because I've been trying to be devil's advocate here. But I have to give Lord of the Rings good. I read it at the right time in my life to have been really captivated by these works. It inspires your imagination. You feel like you're living in this world when you're reading them. I'm a slow reader and was even slower reader when I was a kid. It took me like better part of a year to get through these things, and it was like, and I can still remember sitting in this like room we had in our house in the spring with like this light shining in the afternoon, getting home from school and sitting down and reading and being super excited to turn the pages of these books. Like they're wonderful things, and I've gone back to them a few times. I think with compared to some other more modern works, you could find some criticisms in the storyline, as we were discussing a little bit. But ultimately, it was a pioneering thing, and they're entertaining. How can, like Crofton said, how can you really be like, oh, they're bad? So yeah, they're good.
All right,
I'll go next. Yeah, it's funny because like the Lord of the Rings was not even my favorite fantasy series as a kid, and it was once at one point where I was like, as hipster teens are wont to do, I thought like, oh man, this is overrated, people are way into this, blah 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 blah. But then I came back around, and at one point, and this is true, wrote like bad teenage short fiction of me and my friends in the Lord of the Rings universe, and used
Oh
our
man, I'd love to read that.
and used our names. Like I think my character's name was like Croftinian or something like that. Or like
Croftinian.
whatever, some
That's
sort of
awesome.
like clearly hybrid of my name, like and
Can you write a new one with you and Bo and I in it?
God, if
You
it was
should.
of the same quality. And it's funny because I ripped off all this sort of beats and all this, and I'm like, hey, I could write fantasy. But it just goes to show you what an impact that those books have. And like honestly, I was growing up reading these books in the '90s, and this is when like Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, all these things were really, really popular. The fantasy was really hot on the bookshelves well before it broke into movie theaters, and it all really stemmed from the Lord of the Rings, and people were still reading the Lord of the Rings, and I think that's one of the things that impresses me the most is the fact that it's still read and still appreciated by not just like the current generation and the past generation, but future generations. People are interested and can read those books. They're not written in such a way that they're dense and boring or whatever, except for maybe the swamp stuff in the second book. They're, for the most part, they move along quite well, and they're very accessible. And so to that extent, they have done well today with the movies and all that. Adding more readers, people who I hope will then go to the books after seeing the movies. So because of the fact that I thought I loved them then, because of the fact I love them now, and even based on all Mike said, which I think were valid points, like you need to look at even the most timeless works with a critical eye, and everything he said is true. But I think that it doesn't take away from the fact that it is a seminal work in its genre, and one that continues to impact and influence today. And it just happens to be a pretty good yarn as well. So I'm going to say Lord of the Rings is good.
All right, I'm going to round out the verdicts very simply and say that the movies are okay, but really it's the books. You know, if you haven't read it, it's a good read. You owe it to yourself to read, get lost in the fantasy. Is it a bit good versus evilly? Sure, but it's also a lot of fun, and it's very creative and very inspiring. And you can see all that inspiration in the modern world around you. Certainly, there's a lot of people who are passionate about the kind of things that he didn't necessarily invent, but that he made into the quilt of fantasy that he did. And it doesn't get much better than that. I think a lot of people try to grasp at that level. People who even may get a lot of acclaim, but they don't reach that sort of... They don't touch the spots that Mr. Tolkien touches with The Lord of the Rings. And The Hobbit's quite good too, but The Lord of the Rings really is epic. So I'm going to say that The Lord of the Rings is good! Blast those trumpets! Trumpet! It's fanfare! Lord of the Rings fanfare.
There you have it, folks. Nobody touches both spots like J.R.R. Tolkien.
Woo!
So if you have opinions on the Lord of the Rings, maybe you're like Mike's brother. Maybe you think like all fantasy, I just don't get into that fantasy shit, and you want to tell us why. Well, feel
if he's listening, he's still peeved that we didn't do martial arts.
Yeah, we gave him a little twister. We should call it martial arts just to screw with him.
We should release this on April Fools and call it martial arts.
Then it turns into the Lord of the Rings. That is a total twist. If you think that's a good idea, or if you have ideas about the Lord of the Rings, you want to share them with us, please do. goodbadbull@gmail.com is where you can reach us. You can also just go to goodbadbull.com. You'll find all our episodes there. We would love it if you visited. We've got a ginormous archive. You can also just, go onto iTunes, go onto Stitcher, follow us, give us 5-star reviews. You get everything directly delivered to your podcatcher of choice, I guess. And you can also follow us on Twitter @GoodBadBull. Whenever there's a new episode, we tweet it out, of course. And of course, we are also individuals of an individual nature. Bo, if people want to follow you individually on the internet or elsewhere, how can they do that?
All right, well, you can find me at Bo Schwartz on Twitter. We got This Good, Bad, or Bullshit running strong on a weekly basis again. And we got a new exclamation mark podcast probably coming out. It's probably already out. So if you like video games, check that out. Check me out on Core. And I guested on Stormcast. So if you're here from because of Core and like Here's of the Storm, check out Stormcast. Just Google Stormcast. It's somewhere. Yeah, you can find me in all those places and more.
You said at Bo Schwartz on Twitter somewhere in there, did you?
I did. That was the first thing I said.
Okay, I see. I'm sick. I already forgot that. And Mike, if people want to follow you in real life or in virtual life, how do they do that?
They can follow me on a journey into the West with a ragtag group of dwarves.
And Annie Lennox.
That'd be an interesting group.
She sings the song Into the West.
I'm still on board with this. I'm still on board.
Yeah. So, like my friends of Middle Earth, I'm like, don't give a shit about Twitter. It's true. You ask them, they don't care about Twitter.
They think it's the sound the birds make.
All right, I want to say one. Because now we're having a conversation about outros, and we talked this whole time very disciplined, like about Lord of the Rings, but the new Warcraft. Speaking of things influenced by J.R.R. Tolkien, the Warcraft movie's coming out soon, and we just caught a glimpse of the dwarves. And the dwarves in this, they look like dwarves. They look ugly. They look like the more classic kind of dwarf.
Yeah, not like in the Hobbit movies where they just look like humans.
They actually have like squishy faces and weird.
Yeah, they
dwarf
should
features.
be like broad and short and squat. Anyways, Crofton.
And you can follow me at Crofton Steers on Twitter. Bo was talking about the Warcraft movie while I was doing my outro. That movie looks like a giant pile of garbage. I would like to be proven wrong, but every time I see a trailer for it, I'm just like, oh my god.
Look, before you guys, you can say, that is a video game inspired thing. To if we're gonna go out talking Lord of the Rings, let's go favorite character.
Favorite character.
It's easy.
Yeah,
it's kind of easy, but I really like Gandalf.
Everybody likes Gandalf.
Yeah, I know.
I like Gandalf too. He's awesome. Also because he's an old guy, but he's the shit,
But he's not a human, by the way, right? He's an Ith or something. He's not
an elf, and
not an elf. Not an elf. There's a race of people before the Middle Earth was created. They're like he said. He's not a human. He's not of that Middle Earth. He's an outsider in some kind of a humanish form.
Is that what the?
Yeah, that's what the expanded
wizards.
Wizards are not humans. Like humans don't go to study to become wizards in Middle Earth. They are beings from the angelic plane that make themselves appear, and they're strange and weird.
Old men. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. So that's why Saruman the White, apparently, because he's a bad guy, but he was actually. He was the purest of all of them, but he got so frustrated with the bureaucracy of whatever. I can't remember the names of the world, but the demonic angel plane or whatever.
Stop getting Crofton. Who? Boromir?
It's funny because this is one that I sort of changed my opinion on. Like when I was a kid, who was for sure Aragorn because he's like
Strider.
Yeah, he's Strider. It's too, and I was annoyed that he stopped being called Strider because you're so invested in him as Strider, the Ranger. When he's called Aragorn, I'm like, screw that. Yeah. Strider is way more awesome.
Cool when he's like the mysterious guy in the bar or whatever.
Yeah, I was totally into him. But then at one point it's like, oh, he's the cool guy to like, and then I was like, oh, I got to switch guys. But now as an adult, and I think back on it, I think my favorite character, at least right now, is Peregrine Took.
Jeez.
Yeah, Took is good.
Why not? I think mischievous.
Comic relief, buddy. Like
Are you swayed by the movies though?
No, maybe, because honestly, the movies were the last thing I saw. And if that's so, like when we did Lord of the Rings, we did the books, but we're talking about the movies, and Bo shat a little bit on the movies, not a lot. But
I would shat on the movies too.
I would say that I actually really enjoy the movies,
They're good.
So I would say that they're up there in some of my favorite movies, and
they're pretty good. But like the Hobbit ones, man, they were frustrating me a lot.
I'm not talking about those ones.
No,
I would
Yeah.
say that the Lord of the Rings, what they did, is about as good as we could possibly
I
get.
don't know. Well, this is the problem because when you read these books, like, and I had read them a couple times, I had these images in my head, which is just like, was just right.
No, I know, but I mean, movie
And
wise, like,
then you watch a movie, you're like, oh, really? Like, that's how they did that?
That's always how it is, though.
Yeah, it is always how it is, and they did do a good job, but my I guess I kind of agree with Bo that Gandalf is I kind of like Gandalf, but my next favorite character was Gimli, and I always like because dwarves kind of never get credit,
No, I like Gimli.
I like the dwarves, and it was kind of like him, and he always kind of like him and Legolas. They were kind of like these partners, and they really were both like good. But yet the movie somehow made Gimli seem like an idiot and Legolas just awesome. And I was like, I hated that because in the books, the way I read them, these guys were like equals, and they're from different races who traditionally didn't get along, but they became friends, and they were both kind of like awesome. And the movies, that Gimli just became sort of comic relief, even though he still chopped things with his axe. He wasn't, but Legolas was like backflipping arrows. It's just like I was like, that annoyed me. And I think Gimli's cool, and dwarves don't get enough credit.
they didn't give Gimli his moments where they gave Legolas.
Yeah, they did.
They're like, oh, put Orlando Bloom right shooting an arrow
So
and
attractive.
riding on a and like Gimli like, oh, quick shot of him putting an axe in someone's head, whatever. It's expensive special effects. We're gonna spend it on
Yeah,
Legolas.
but they have like Legolas sliding.
Like, who
down.
wants to spend a ton of special effects money on John Rhys Davies? Like,
He's
you know.
awesome.
No, he's
What?
awesome, but he is not a sexy leading man like Orlando Bloom.
I will say that as soon as and this is why like I never really even looked at the Hobbits as closely as I should have until as an adult. But like when I was a kid and I read the Hobbit, they're all dwarves. There's like 12 dwarves and like a friggin' one Hobbit. But when you read
And
when you-
Gandalf.
yeah, and Gandalf obviously. When you read the Lord of the Rings, it's like of the party, there's 4 of them are hobbits. So like it was much easier to get behind somebody like the one elf or the one dwarf or whatever. But I still had dwarf ODD from the last book, so I was less keen on it.
That's keen on. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
but yeah, now,
incidentally-
right now I'm in Peregrine Took, but I will say that none of the character I don't consider the Lord of the Rings to be a super strong character book. Like in terms of like the characters in there are very broad swaths of characters. They don't really get really into what makes them tick. I actually found the movies got into them more as people than a lot of what was in the books.
Yeah, they're pretty simplistic. What are motivating these characters? That not they're just sort of doing stuff. They're not fleshed out really, but.
Yeah.
Anyways, I
Incidentally,
should re-enter this.
I thought
Gandalf is an Istar. Sorry, that's what he.
I thought Sean Bean did a money job as Boromir. He really sold me on, especially if you see the extended versions with the scenes of him and his dad in Gondor and stuff. Really sold me on the idea of a character like being vulnerable but strong and all that sort of stuff at the same time. Really felt more multifaceted than the version I remembered from the books. So
Sean Bean's good at getting killed in fantasy series.
in any series,
He's kind of good, that guy.
he's good at getting killed.
All right, I guess we're done now.
I was
could ramble
disappointed
on.
that he didn't get killed in The Martian. Spoiler alert. Not
I didn't see
nobody
that, you bastard.
I just laugh at he's like 'cause
It's
he
Sean
puts-
Bean. He plays like he's on screen for like 5 minutes or whatever. Like it's a cameo. It's
like
not.
he's on Earth, right? Like
Yeah, like he's not even part of the
It
exploration.
would just be really funny if they wrote in the script for some reason, because he's just like some mission control guy on Earth. It'd be really funny. He's like, Sean Bean character has heart attack and dies. No reason needed. Or
Because he like
whatever.
dies in everything, like literally
He
everything.
played Beowulf in that there was like a movie kind of CGI movie.
No, it wasn't. It was another dude, wasn't it?
No.
And what's Angelina Jolie? in
Yeah,
it?
that CGI movie is really good though. I watched
Is
it
it?
a few years ago. Yeah, it's good. It still holds up. It's pretty entertaining. I don't think.
Yeah, it's like CGI Sean Bean.
No, it's Ray Winstone. That's
Yeah,
okay.
that's what I thought too. It was not Sean Bean.
Oh, okay. Well,
But
Thank
no,
Christ.
you can be forgiven, Mike, because honestly, Ray Winstone is like Sean Bean 2.0. Like, so he also played the Punisher in Punisher Warzone, which was like a shitty movie, but the guy looks like the Punisher, so it worked.
Wait, you're thinking of a different Ray Winstone. This is Fat Ray Winstone.
What? Am I? No.
No, it's not the Punisher Ray Winstone. I know there's two.
There's two Ray Winstones?
Yeah, there's like I'm gonna link you his profile here in Skype. Check it out. It's the I think he's in Sexy Beast. It's the fat gangster, British gangster.
Oh, no
Ray
way.
Winstone.
Yeah, it doesn't look like Sean Bean. He looks like he might die though.
Nice.
Oh man, that's crazy. I always thought it was like, who is? Maybe I'm missing the guy's name in Punisher Warzone. What's the guy's name?
No, I think it's this guy Punisher.
Oh, it's Ray Stevenson. I don't even know how I got those two mixed up.
Hey Crofton, what
All
time
right,
is it?
Before you finish that thought, thank you for watching the VOD. Check out more good stuff at Good Bad Ball.
You probably left this dumber than you came in, which we did our job.
They can't stop
Our
talking
work
for 2
here is
seconds.
done.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bo's gone crazy.